If F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote a novel on an Indian king and an Indian queen of the Jazz age, he would not have needed to come up with fictional characters. The last Maharaja of Indore, Maharaja Yeshwant Rao Holkar II, and his wife Maharani Sanyogitabai Holkar led a life of sophistication, wealth, style, and scandal. Like a Fitzgerald novel, they both met very tragic ends. But for a glorious time in the late 1920s and 1930s, they were at the center of the most elite European cafe society. Maharaja Yeshwant was an aesthete. He put his principality, Indore, on the international style and architecture map for many reasons that I'll get into in this video. But what was different about him was that he was a modernist at his core. His palace is the first example of modernist design on the Indian subcontinent. Modernism is a type of design that favors minimalism, functionality, and clean lines. The Maharaja commissioned the German architect Eckhard Matthesius to design this palace in the 1930s, but it wasn't just the building. The Maharaja purchased and procured some of the most in vogue furniture, artworks, and jewelry by the most talented and renowned Art Deco artists of the time. He was the most important Art Deco collector of his time in the world. Many of the pieces that he purchased and commissioned during his lifetime have sold on auction in recent years for millions, and most of them being procured by a Qatari prince who was just as fascinated by the Maharaja as I am. Despite being stylishly photographed by Man Ray, and despite his photographs and portraits circulating on the internet today, the Maharaja is a very mysterious figure, and that is on purpose. Towards the end of his life, he had planned to write a memoir, but before his death, he destroyed all his notes and letters. This was not surprising. He was a very timid and discreet person. It seems that he didn't want to be exposed to anyone, even after his death. One of the most intriguing portraits of him to me is this one from 1929. This is the painting of the Maharaja. He was around 20 to 21 years old here and a student at Oxford University. This portrait was done in Paris at the home and studio of the legendary French painter Bernard Boutet de Monvel. There are many reasons why this painting is so striking. He is an Indian man, clearly, but he's dressed in a very tailored and chic Western outfit. We notice his sophistication, his slick back hair, his slender fingers and frame, and he looks away from the painter. He also looks a little sad. There is an air of melancholy about him. This is completely different to the Western stereotype of the theatrical Indian Maharaja that plagued the West for so long. In this video essay, I want to delve into the world of this very chic Maharaja who sadly struggled with finding his place in this world. He was really torn between India and the West. Not Britain, because he and his forefathers were definitely anti-British, but he had a love for France and the United States in particular, where he could be free. Before I continue, hello, I'm Tass, and this series on my YouTube channel is called Maharaja Swag and Maharani Style, Stories of Royals from the Indian Subcontinent. This is part 1 of a 2-part series on the last Maharaja of Indore. I read a really brilliant biography on the Maharaja by the French writer Geraldine Lenain. Before her book, there was very limited information about him. She shared the dark realities that plagued him throughout his life based on extensive research. And I think her research is actually the first time someone has researched the Maharaja and put on paper his life story. Throughout the book, there is this dichotomy between this very opulent lifestyle that he lived and his personal struggles that ultimately extended to struggles with alcohol and other substances. Also, after the sudden death of his beloved first wife, Maharani Sanyogita, he married his daughter's nanny, who was an older American woman, for a few years, only to divorce her and marry his third wife, another American woman, on the same day as his divorce. These were major scandals in the 1930s. He also had a very tumultuous relationship with his father, who was credibly linked to a murder. Yeshwant, I'm going to call him Yeshwant in this video for ease of reference, became Maharaja during the Roaring Twenties. He inherited an impossibly large fortune, so he spent his money on clothing, palaces, residences, art, and cars. The predicament of Indian princes from the late 18th century onwards was very nuanced. They didn't wield any military or diplomatic power. So this left Indian princes with a lot of wealth, and many of them devoted their money to the arts, their palaces, and luxury goods from Europe. The British also encouraged the Maharajas in their endeavors in the West, as they saw it as a means of securing their allegiance. Royalty and aristocrats from the West were equally fascinated with objects from the exotic East, as they would refer to it. So there was this parallel interest by both the elites of the West and the East in rare objects that they wouldn't necessarily have access to. Sparing no expense, Maharajas became leading patrons of luxury houses in London and Paris, commissioning the finest products of European workshops and the latest work of European artists and designers. Indian princes established themselves as the new creative patrons of European high design. Yeshwant followed in this tradition of Maharajas before him, except he took his aesthetic interest to another level entirely. Yeshwant was born on the 6th of September 1908 into a very wealthy state. As a child, he was very sickly, and this delicate constitution plagued him throughout his life. By all accounts, he was a quiet, fragile, and very timid child. The destructive relationship between his parents was damaging for the young boy, especially because his father did everything possible to separate the young boy from his mother. This created a very toxic environment for Yeshwant to grow up in. At the age of 13, he was sent to England for schooling, first to the Cheam School in Surrey and then to Charterhouse. These were prestigious boarding schools, but of course he was the odd one out, being an Indian prince with dark skin at a British prep school. In 1929, at the age of 15, he left boarding school for a while to go back to Indore to get married, in accordance with the instructions set out by royal astrologers. The groom and his bride were minors. They went through with the formal marriage ceremony, but they would not consummate the marriage until years later. Yeshwant became the Maharaja as a teenager under very scandalous circumstances. In 1926, his father, the then 13th Maharaja of Indore, was credibly linked and charged with the murder of the lover of his favorite courtesan and mistress. Her name was Mumtaz Begum, and she escaped from the Indore palace to Bombay. The Maharaja had ordered that her lover, a prominent Muslim businessman in Bombay named Bowler, be killed. British army officers stopped to help the couple at the scene of the crime and saved her life. Mumtaz Begum gave compelling evidence in the trial that followed at the Bombay High Court. The trial was so highly publicized that it cost his father the throne, as he was forced to abdicate in order to avoid the humiliation of a public trial. Yeshwant became the 14th Maharaja of Indore at the age of 17 and a half under these circumstances. After this, he returned to England to Oxford University as a member of Christ College. During the 1920s, Yeshwant relocated to England to study at Oxford, where a private tutor, Dr. Marcel Hardy, introduced him to the cultural scene of European modern art. Through Hardy, Yeshwant met two figures who would become seminal in his creative pursuits: the German modern architect Eckhart Matthesius and French artist, advisor, and writer Henri-Pierre Rocher, both of whom were closely linked to the avant-garde. Together, the three friends visited England, Germany, and France, exploring art fairs, museum exhibitions, galleries, and artist studios, stirring in Yeshwant an appetite for the modern. Henri-Pierre Rocher was a central figure in modernist circles in Paris and New York. He introduced Picasso to Gertrude Stein and was close friends with Man Ray. Henri-Pierre Rocher became Yeshwant's right-hand man for 30 years in matters of property purchases and art deals. Eckhart Matthesius was an acquaintance from Oxford who went on to build Yeshwant's iconic modernist and Bauhaus fantasy palace in Indore. But at university, Yeshwant was not a scholarly person. Ultimately, he did not manage to graduate from Oxford University. During the 1920s and the 1930s, the Maharaja and Maharani spent more time in Europe than in India. Their favorite place was France. The Holkars were seduced by Paris for its good taste and refinement. London, by comparison, seemed like a boring, grey, industrial and ugly city. In France, they felt liberated from the obligation of the British Raj. No one here suspected the limits of their power, nor the humiliation they sometimes endured at the hands of the English. Indian princes were treated as true sovereigns in France, whereas in England they were pseudo-royalty. For the Holkars, it was parties with a different jet set, with whom they danced, smoked, and drank the night away. In France, the royal couple bought properties and were known as patrons of art and culture. Also, it's clear that Yeshwant was very much in love with his very young wife. He wrote in a letter that he wanted to keep her away from the drama of the royal court back home in Indore, and he wanted to have a successful marriage. There was a regent in Indore at the time. This allowed the young royal couple to really be these glamorous international figures. There are very famous photographs of them honeymooning in Cannes, shot by Man Ray. Man Ray discussed the couple in his memoir. Next year, the Maharaja was in the south of France with his young bride. He had taken an entire floor of a hotel in Cannes for himself and his retinue. I arrived in Cannes before noon, was assigned to my room in the suite. Maharani was an exquisite girl in her teens. She wore French clothes and a huge emerald ring. The Maharaja had bought it for her that morning while taking a walk. The next day, I was asked to bring my camera to their suite to make a series of photographs that would be a record of their honeymoon. First, I had to play some jazz, to which the subjects danced, and then they sat down holding hands. I made a few exposures, after which I suggested that they pose separately for individual portraits. Much like other Indian aristocrats and royals, the Holkars used their fabulous wealth to bankroll their trips to Europe and expensive lifestyle. But what set them apart in this world of extravagance was their excellent taste, their patronage of the finest names in the arts in the 1930s, and their contribution to the culture of the Art Deco period. There are also very famous paintings of the couple by the French artist Bernard Boutet de Monvel in the 1930s that really gives us a glimpse into their level of style and glamour. I mentioned one of them earlier in the video. De Monvel's portraits of the Maharaja and Maharani feature them in Western and Indian attire. One of the paintings is all about the Maharaja's quiet elegance. He is dressed in a crisp white bow tie and tails, and de Monvel has captured the Maharaja's delicately tapering hands with finesse. In another portrait, the Maharaja is in his traditional attire, complete with a sword and the famous Indore pearls. It would seem that the Maharaja was torn between the two worlds he inhabited, wanting to live in both while refusing to belong to any. The Maharani's portrait, reflecting the artist's love for balance and geometry, is particularly compelling by including intricate details like the lace border of her chiffon sari and the cut of her emeralds. De Monvel draws on his subject's impeccable taste to tell the story. Despite her extreme youth, the Maharani holds her own, looking comfortably poised in her clothes. She was dressed by some of the most famous names of the time, including Schiaparelli. They had one child together, a daughter named Usha. Their title as the most chic couple of the jazz age is something I want to explore fully in part 2 of this series. Maharani Sanyogita has a story worth telling as well. She was disturbingly young during most of her life as Maharani, and she died very young at the age of 22. So I really want to do a deep dive into their life in a separate video. Also, if you are enjoying this video so far, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. In 1930, Yeshwant returned to Indore. At 22 years old, he was committed to his role as Maharaja. He then took on a project that would become a major part of his legacy. The Manik Bagh, meaning the Garden of Rubies Palace, was the first modernist palace in the Indian subcontinent. The Manik Bagh renovation project started in 1930 and was completed in 1933. Yeshwant wanted his palace to reflect his very modern lifestyle, and he rejected the colonial style that was present in India at the time. He appointed Eckhart Matthesius for the job. The young German architect from Berlin that he met at Oxford was also in his 20s. They were both like-minded spirits that found each other in this creative collaboration. The Manik Bagh was a major challenge. challenge: to transform an Indo-European palace to a modern building equipped with all the elements of Western comfort, yet able to withstand the rigors of the Deccan climate. Ambitious, Matthesius wanted to turn it into a total work of art, an inseparable whole. He wanted to design everything, from the exterior to the interior, the facades and the gardens, furniture and tableware, right down to staff uniforms and the Maharaja's bathrobe. Art and life must merge. The interior design of Manik Bagh cost around $4 million at the time, so over $70 million in today's terms. Eckhart Matthesius designed many of the interior pieces, but at the time, the Manik Bagh project was huge news internationally because of the Great Depression in the US and Europe. Artists were struggling to get commissions, so the news that a very wealthy Indian prince was building a palace and needed Art Deco pieces to furnish it became a sensation in the West. Today, the palace is a government building. Most of the furniture and art pieces that were once there were auctioned off by the royal family in recent years. But there are photographs of what Manik Bagh looked like in the 1930s. Many of these photographs were taken by the architect himself, Eckhart Matthesius. These are examples of the more common colonial-style palaces that existed in British India at the time. Manik Bagh was completely different. There have been some photo exhibitions over the years to showcase the vintage photographs of Manik Bagh with drawings and watercolors by Eckhart Matthesius of the palace. This is the view of the Manik Bagh palace, but it was retouched by the architect for the illusion of a flat roof. This was the Maharaja's office. This was the Manik Bagh Palace study room. This was the Manik Bagh Palace Darbar. Royal court or Darbar had a very fresh take. There are clean lines and muted palettes here as well. Usually these spaces were very ornate in other palaces, so this had a more streamlined design. This is a picture of the nursery in Manik Bagh. This is a photograph of the staircase of the Great Hall. This is a photograph of the bar at Manik Bagh. This is the Maharaja's living room. All these photographs were taken by Eckhart Matthesius. This is another view of the veranda with other design pieces. And this was the Maharaja's bedroom. And the carpet here, as we can see there, was auctioned off in 2016. Everything was very modern, streamlined, and functional. This was totally different in the 1930s to other traditional Indian palaces that existed, which were historic, ornate, and in the colonial style. Manik Bagh used artificial leathers and painted grained glass instead of wallpaper. The palace also had India's first air conditioning system, along with metal-framed and tinted windows, hydraulic doors, machined marble, and modern plumbing. Yet, after 1933, the revival of Baroque overshadowed Matthesius's modern vision. By the 1970s, Manik Bagh had faded into obscurity, its grandeur eroded by time. With Matthesius leaving during World War II and the Maharaja rarely living there, the palace was eventually taken over by the state, with its modernist legacy left without successors. The modern and forward-looking aesthetic of Manik Bagh reflected the Maharaja's independent and cosmopolitan outlook. The Holkars didn't live there long. Yeshwant Rao Holkar's wife, Maharani Sanyogita Devi, died in 1937 at just 22, and his enthusiasm for design faded. In 1980, many of the palace's furnishings, from leather chairs to glass bookshelves, were sold off at a Sotheby's auction in Monaco, with French fashion designer Yves Saint Laurent among the bidders. Now, Manik Bagh's avant-garde legacy survives only in its bones, design drawings, and photographs. It stood as a political statement, modernity over colonial tradition. To those belonging to the cafe society, motorhomes, yachts, country houses, and even airplanes were the latest accessories. Yeshwant wanted them all. But of course, they had to be customized and designed to embody a vision of modernity. Still in his early 20s, he loved customizing and driving his luxury cars. He also loved very eye-catching colors. Orange was his favorite color. One of his cars in particular, this car, I'll put the details on the screen, was at the time the most expensive car ever built. Cost around 110,000 euros to produce. He also had real jewels fitted inside this car with the Holkar family coat of arms. Also, his car was customized so that everything had a specific place, like his umbrella, his ashtray, his luggage, his sunglasses, and his cigarette lighter. Yeshwant had a motorhome built for hunting. He commissioned an aircraft in 1937 from an English company and created his own palace on rails called the Pullman Royal for his trips to Bombay and Delhi to avoid staying at hotels. The Pullman Royal was technologically advanced for its time, with air conditioning, heating, and even towel warmers. Most of these projects were completed by European companies and designed by Eckhart Matthesius. In 1937, the next project that Yeshwant and his German architect undertook was a yacht. But in that year, Maharani Sanyogita suddenly died. Yeshwant was devastated and stopped all projects immediately. By 1939, Eckhart Matthesius was not allowed to return to India. After the official declaration of war against Germany, the British did not allow any Germans to enter British India. This marked the end of a very creative era for modernism in India and the collaboration of these two people, Yeshwant and Eckhart. The death of Maharani Sanyogita, or San as Yeshwant would call her, was devastating for him. They grew up together knowing that their destinies were really intertwined. After her death, he stopped all his avant-garde projects that he had in the works. Their daughter Usha was 4 years old at the time of her mother's death, and he was just 29. His life then started to take a very different turn. Maharani Sanyogita died on the 13th of July, 1937. In October 1937, Yeshwant was spotted with a mysterious woman at a horse racing event. The woman was in fact his daughter's nanny, an American woman named Margaret Lawler Bryan. She was a nurse, she was a divorcee, and she had no children. She was also 4 years older than Yeshwant. Maharaja reportedly met her earlier in 1937 when he was hospitalized for a while at the Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles. He was severely underweight and weak from insomnia due to drug and alcohol use. For Margaret, who was a modest middle-class American woman working as a nurse, marrying a ridiculously wealthy Indian Maharaja like Yeshwant was like winning a lottery. The royal couple offered Margaret the position of nanny to Usha, which she immediately accepted. From then onwards, she had followed the Holkar family on all their travels across the US, India, and Europe. After the death of Maharani Sanyogita, no one in Yeshwant's entourage seemed to have noticed his affair with Margaret, or Peggy as he called her. She became the new Maharani when he secretly married her in Mexico on the 18th of September 1938, becoming public knowledge only 6 months later in March 1939 when he finally returned to Indore. This incredible news aroused strong reactions in his home state and far beyond. The installation of the quote nurse unquote in the Maharani's bedroom in Manik Bagh was becoming the talk of the town. Margaret was not really recognized by Indian officials or even the British Raj, although she was given the leeway to call herself Maharani Holkar. This affair was a major international scandal, and it caused even more tension for the state of Indore. But it wasn't just the tension of his scandalous second marriage that caused stress for Yeshwant. World War II was declared in 1939, and like other Indian princely states, Indore contributed to the British effort monetarily. But in 1940, Yeshwant chose to leave Indore and settle with his wife and daughter in a small town called Santa Ana in Orange County, California, in the United States. Historically, he still holds the title as Santa Ana's richest resident. His decision to leave for the United States was brought about by the serious turmoil that was unfolding in Europe. His home in California was nothing like Manik Bagh. It was huge and security was the priority. It was akin to a fortress in order to protect his daughter, Usha. The house still exists today, and in 2022, it was declared a historical landmark in Southern California because of its association with the last Maharaja of Indore. The Holkars had been in Santa Ana for only a year when they announced that they would be returning to India. Princess Usha stayed in the US with her governess, who was named her legal guardian. This was quite surprising to me when I read this. Margaret and Yeshwant traveled back and forth from Indore to Santa Anna, but Margaret really found it difficult to adjust to this new life as a Maharani. She flew back to the United States in 1942 and moved into their second home at Emerald Bay, also in California. But what happened a year later, in 1943, was even more scandalous than everything that had occurred before in Yeshwant's life. In 1943, Yeshwant started living on a ranch in Reno, where he promptly filed for divorce from Margaret. 10 hours after his divorce from Margaret, he married a woman named Mrs. Euphemia Watt Crane. He was married to Margaret for just 4.5 years in total. In the divorce, Margaret received money, jewelry, and a few properties in the US. Even more surprisingly, she was given custody for a time of Princess Usha, who she went on to legally adopt. The actual reason for the divorce was never confirmed by either of them, but there were rumors that Yeshwant wanted a son. In his divorce papers, he accused his wife of, quote, extreme mental cruelty. During this time, Yeshwant started drinking a lot and he was using opium more often. He was more erratic in his behavior, and the British started to notice this. His decision to leave for the United States at this time was welcomed by British officials in Indore. The new woman in his life, Euphemia, was a married 29-year-old American woman who had a young daughter already. Yeshwant and Euphemia started their love affair in August 1942 while they were both married. In fact, they both obtained quickie divorces on the same day in Reno from their respective spouses. On the day of their divorces, they went on to get married in Vegas at the Little Vegas Chapel. This elopement with a married foreign woman was so far beyond the conduct expected of the Maharaja by both British and Indian authorities. Yeshwant and Euphemia had a son named Richard who was born in Indore 10 months after their marriage. During this very scandalous and messy time, there was also a change of the men in power in Indore who influenced the Maharaja and who basically ran the state while he was away. Geraldine shares her view that the Maharaja became even more gullible after the death of Maharani Sanyogita, and that he was really being manipulated in many ways by a set of sycophants who started surrounding him in these years. Also, Euphemia hated the design of Manik Bagh and changed it as much as she could. Yeshwant became more sick and bedridden during this time as well, a combination of drinking, drug usage, and ill health. Leading up to the 1947 partition of British India into two independent states being India and Pakistan, the princes faced a very different set of challenges. Above all, they wanted to ensure their power and guarantee the future of their principalities after the fall of the British Raj. Some princes dreamt of a golden retirement on the polo fields and beaches of the French Riviera, while others more involved in nation building were already planning to take over as ambassadors, lawyers, doctors, or officers, replacing the British. Only a handful of princes dubbed the Third Force resisted. Yeshwant was one of them. Yeshwant was very indecisive and even reluctant during this period to act. He waited to see what other princes would do, and when most of them joined independent India, he followed suit. Now, almost in his 40s, Yeshwant was a very different man than the tastemaker that he once was in his early 20s. He saw his duty as a Maharaja as a painful obligation. In November 1949, another scandal rocked the Indore royal court. Yeshwant's father, the exiled former Maharaja, saw in a catalogue for a jewelry sale in New York City that the American jeweler Harry Winston was selling 3 pieces of jewelry from his own personal collection, meaning the Maharaja's personal collection. The question was, how did these jewels get into the hands of Harry Winston? The matter was further complicated by the fact that after Indian independence, there was a question regarding the status of these jewels. Who did they belong to? Did they belong to Yeshwant? Did they belong to Yeshwant's father? or did they belong to the government of India under the status of being a national heritage? There was a major inquiry into this by the Indian government. Finally, there was a letter produced, signed by Yeshwant, giving Harry Winston permission to sell the jewels. There was even more correspondence confirming this, and that one of his friends, a person named Harry Naidu, acted as the middleman to ensure that the transaction went through. This matter became so serious that Yeshwant even offered to buy back the 3 pieces of jewelry from Harry Winston in order for it to just all go away. During this inquiry, representatives from the government of India discovered that other precious and expensive items from the Indore court were also missing. Even more questions arose, and Yeshwant and his circle were under suspicion by the Indian government. This debacle caused even more stress for Yeshwant. Harry Naidu had summoned a doctor for him who started injecting him with morphine daily. By this time, he had an opioid addiction and remained in bed for most of his days. By this point, his third wife was also under suspicion by the Indian government of wanting to secure her own financial status by transferring certain jewels to the US. There was also a rumor at this time that Yeshwant's wife was having an affair with his friend Harry Naidu. In 1956, Yeshwant's now 23-year-old daughter Usha got married. At the wedding, he met a socialite from New York named Florine Helpman. Despite being ill and having developed an addiction to alcohol, Yeshwant hit it off with Florine. Platonic or romantic, it's uncertain, but in 1959, Euphemia and Yeshwant divorced. Maharaja Yeshwantrao Holkar II was not just progressive in his taste in art and architecture. During his reign, he approved a decree that emancipated 250,000 Dalit people in Indore. He also made sure that his daughter Usha was named as his successor. On the 5th of December 1961, the Maharaja passed away at the Breach Candy Hospital in Mumbai. He was 53 years old. The last Maharaja of Indore will forever be remembered as being a non-conformist. For a time, he and Maharani Sanyogita were an enigma, the most glamorous patrons of culture and art in the West. He was a visionary in style and in taste. Manik Bagh stands as a testament to that. His legacy is undefeated as one of the most important Art Deco collectors in history. It seems that the sudden death of Maharani Sanyogita was really devastating for Maharaja Yeshwantrao. When she died in 1937, the quote, modern Maharaja tastemaker died as well. He essentially gave up on his collecting ambitions, and his projects remained unfinished. A lot of the passion that he showed for aesthetics never fully returned. Also, despite his immense wealth and sophistication, he tragically never found his place in this world. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe. I'm going to be doing a second part to this video because I wanted to really delve into the couple, the Maharaja and Maharani, the Holkars as they would call them. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.